Hello there and welcome everybody to this Friday's afternoon virtual space hero LinkedIn Live. I'm pretty excited because we said a few minutes ago, game on, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Many of us have been dealing with questions around the virtual classroom this year because we were thrown into it. And it was a little bit complicated for us because we were losing our participants' attention. Also because the virtual space, it is a difficult space to learn and to connect to each other. But, and now there is the big but, we also know that there are small elements of gamification that we've been starting to introduce throughout the year. Is it Mentimeter? Is it Kahoot? Or maybe Slido, where we are using a little bit of a competitive or group collective element in order to motivate our learners to stay in the learning process. We still know that gamification is totally underutilized in learning settings. And gamification means nothing more than using motivational techniques like those in the video game industry and to motivate the learners to stay on top of their learning process. And I'm really happy and I'm super excited because I'm not a gamer at all, but I had the chance to participate in a really crazy, and I really enjoyed the experience, leadership game just recently that I wanted to get to know better. And I wanted to understand the processes that the founders, the creators are using in order to keep the learners engaged and to foster their learning experience, when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to communication, problem solving, decision making, strategic thinking, project management, VUCA, and much more. A very powerful tool. And with this, I'm going to immediately open the virtual doors for my today's guest. But I want to welcome you again. And I see that there are quite a few people out there connecting from Facebook, from LinkedIn, from YouTube. So don't miss to use the chat functions and to place all your questions and comments into the chat. We have a super expert here on the stage with us at Virtual Space Hero who is going to talk and to share the deepest secrets, I would say. Sounds very dramatic, but very deep secrets about gamification. And with that, I'm happy that you are here with us. And I'm also very happy because I already see him backstage, that Mohsin Memon is here with us, connecting from pretty far away from me at least. And with that, we open the Virtual Space Hero doors to Mohsin and welcome to our stage. Hi there.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi there. Fantastic. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing very well.
Marcin, let us know, where are you connecting from?
I am currently plugging in from Mumbai, India. That's where I am at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And I know that's also why we were not able to do the LinkedIn live stream a little bit later, because time zone differences, time zone challenges. But it is
Yep.
fantastic. We have a great Friday afternoon, and you have a great Friday evening or late afternoon,
Evening.
right? Right,
Yeah.
evening. Marcin, let us know a little bit about, because I already know a bit about your background, but there are people, of course, viewing and participating here who don't know really what is your background. So how did you get into gaming?
Hmm. Well, if I were to put it simply, it was quite by chance. I started out playing a lot of games as a kid. And, if you were to ask my parents, they would probably say that he's never going to amount to anything because he's always playing games. And as much as I played games, I never thought that I'd actually be able to use it for something meaningful, productive, and incredible in today's time. I started my career in IT, and I did a lot of business requirement documentation for Delta Airlines and Walmart back in the day when I was doing business analysis and project management. And one thing led to another. I eventually decided that I wanted to get into learning. And I've been in the learning space for nearly 10 years now. And I started out doing a lot of virtual classroom learning experiences, And I realized that we needed to make the classroom experience more fun, more engaging, more involving in a way that really gets people excited about learning. So I would always bring in, games and fun things to do in the classroom environment. And it wasn't until one of my clients took a wild gamble with me and said, let's build a game. And my first game was built with using Microsoft Excel and WhatsApp. And that was the first thing I ever built. And it was a hit. It was incredible. And I was amazed at what it can do and what it was able to do. So then we got into technology and used technology to facilitate games for learning.
Oh, wow. That sounds so interesting. How did you do that using Excel and WhatsApp? Was it a programmed Excel like macro, micro, whatever you can do there in Excel?
Yeah, yeah, it was very, very simple. In fact, you know what's crazy is that when I got into it, when I started doing it, I had never written a single macro. And I looked it up on YouTube, searched for things and found the right macros and edited it. And what I simply wanted to do was display a dashboard for people to look at and know where they stand. And I think that's such an important mechanism, which is in fact called feedback. Feedback is such an important mechanism in games that it lets a player know what it is that they're doing and what their actions are creating a result thereof. And that lets them know if what they're doing is on the right track or if they need to change something. And that's a very powerful mechanic used in games. So I use the Microsoft Excel for feedback mechanism to show players what to do or what their results were. And then I used WhatsApp for them to input their interactions. And I got everybody to kind of use WhatsApp groups to do different actions. And I created rules through which they would play. And that was that.
And you know what? I was just thinking the same as Gudrun is saying here. Thanks, Gudrun. Such simple tools, and you can create a game for your participants. It just sounds amazing to me. I love the idea. I have never thought about that. How you could use, for example, well, I'm not really familiar with macros either, but really fantastic. Thanks so much. Also, Roya is saying, yeah, really useful to understand that. Exactly. Um, so, and the game, what was it about? So, what was the learning goal of the game that you built at that time?
Yeah, you know what? I want to say that one of the things that's really, really important in creating a game or creating game-like scenarios is to have an alternate world, something that really takes you out of your current environment and puts you in something else. So the game was actually about moving from Earth to Mars. And the whole storyline revolved around a group of people who have to select the right people to take with them. Everybody gets a little note card, and the note card would have a profession on it. And the objective was to work as a team and to collaborate. And the way I surfaced that was really in the design of how I built that. Basically, what people would have to do is they would have to do different activities, and throughout the journey from Earth to Mars, they have to do different activities. And let's say, for example, if I say I want to go dancing, and you say you want to go running, but if I want to join you, then I would give you a thumbs up under your running. So imagine a WhatsApp thread that's just kind of rolling. So you would write running, and if I want to join you, I would give you a thumbs up. And if there are 20 people in the room, they would all give you thumbs up. But to do that, we all have to be aligned. We all have to be talking to one another that you say, hey, I'm going to now put dancing or I'm going to now put running, and everybody go ahead and give me a thumbs up so we can all join. And what I had done in the back end of this system was when people work together, when there are more thumbs up towards a single activity, they get more points. But if there
Hmm.
are singular activities where people are just doing one thing, like you're doing dancing, I'm doing running, somebody else is doing swimming, everybody's doing their own thing, they get lesser points. And the feedback shows that on the dashboard. So they get to see what they're doing and what is the result of that. What this allowed us to do was to really get all the players kind of talking to one another. And in the debrief, it was really powerful to reflect and look at what really happened. Why weren't we able to achieve our objective? And the realization was because we weren't aligned. And then we can take those kinds of learnings, bring it back to work. We can link it to organizational objectives and how sometimes we work in silos and not work with each other, not see what's going on with the other person. Da da da. You know where that can go.
Yeah. Um, Sounds really exciting. Let me go maybe one step back. How do you, because if I hear like we are using WhatsApp and we're using Excel, so I can assume that the majority of the participants might be ready or feel comfortable with that environment. But would you suggest to prepare participants like in depth before joining a gamified instructional-led virtual training? How do you do that? What would that involve?
One of the things that I do is I set the context for people. So there are actually two things that I do very consistently in all of my games that I've hosted up, run. The first thing I do is I set the context, which is I let the people know that prepare to be confused, prepare to feel lost. It's okay if you will feel that way. It's perfectly all right. And I also set them at ease, saying that things like, if you made it here, you're going to be all right. And because a lot of people are also have technophobia, if you will, where they often think they're not good enough or they're not going to be able to play a game because they've never played a game in their entire lives, right? So all of these thoughts are kind of playing out in the back of your head, and you think that maybe I'm not going to really going to get anything out of this experience. So one of the things I do is I set the participants at ease and I let them know that if you're failing, it's okay. It's perfectly normal for you to make all the mistakes that you can possibly make. You'll learn from that experience. And I set them at ease. And I think that's such an important thing to do, especially when you're using something like games in corporate environment with adults who are maybe 50, 60 years old. And you've really got to make it easier for them and help them feel comfortable. The second thing that I do is I take them out of their current environment and I create what is known as the magic circle. And Johan Huizinga, a known author on this topic, spoke about and wrote about the magic circle. And he says, a magic circle is created when a player is interacting with a toy or a plaything and there is bound by rules. And when you start to operate through those rules, those constraints, you then are in the magic circle. A great example of that could be somebody kicking the ball into a net, right? Kick the ball into a net, it's just the ball goes in the net. There's nothing more to it. But when you create rules and constraints and you put it into the interaction, kicking a ball into a net is all of a sudden a goal. And the world will come and watch you play because it's a game, it's a sport, and there's magic circle inside which the players are engaging. So the second thing that I do is I create the magic circle and I let people know that they are now inside it in unique ways. You don't have to say it explicitly. So one of the ways that I did in this example that I just now quoted was I let them know that they're moving from Earth to Mars, and these are the constraints, and these are the rules by which they're going to play. And all of a sudden, everybody starts to operate by those rules, and magic happens.
So it's these two rules: create a safe environment, to say so, and to create the magic circle with rules for all the participants being super clear.
Yep.
Cool. And you know what? I'm just thinking, when I joined your leadership game, and we're going to talk about that very soon. When I joined that, I still remember when you said exactly more or less the same words at the beginning. So don't worry, you're here. That is the most important thing now. And I still remember, because I wasn't nervous, but I felt like, dear God, I'm not a gamer. I was just like, recently I started playing Super Mario on a play, whatever it was, something older, and I'm like so bad at that. But I really enjoyed it because you set the environment, you created that safety ring or safety belt for all of us, and that's really super important. Thanks for sharing. So we know how to create a safe environment for our participants, to create also sort of a powerful learning experience. When we move on and we think about how do you enable learning through gamification, so what are the most important game mechanics to engage your participants?
Well, there are many. And I think one of the most overused ones are your points, badges, and leaderboards. Yeah, these are the most overused ones. But, truthfully, just slapping these mechanics to anything is not going to turn it into a game, or is not really going to build engagement or gamification, if you will. There are a number of game mechanics that you could use. In fact, I'm writing a series of posts right now which are on the 21 game mechanics that you could use. And if you just hashtag 21 game mechanics, you'll find a lot of content around that. And I'm building the content with the intent to help learning professionals learn how they can use some of these game mechanics. So if I were to quote a few of them, one would be feedback, as I've just now mentioned earlier. The other one is purpose, right? Creating a purpose for people to do why they're doing what they're doing, right? And the story does that so beautifully, like the example that I just now gave of moving from Earth to Mars, and you've got to set up a colony there. And to do that, you need all the right people, you need all the right resources. And but it's also about the flight, the trip from Earth to Mars. So you've got to make sure that you conserve your food supplies and your air and all these other things. So that creates purpose within the players. That's another mechanic that I think is very heavily used in the game space, in the game environment, but not so much when it comes to learning. I mean, many a times we design entire learning programs, entire learning initiatives with no clarity on what's going to be the purpose. Why will this typical user spend his expected 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 hours on going through your content? What's really the purpose? So I think
Mhm.
as learning professionals, we've got to create that purpose. And the last one I think, which is really, really powerful, is challenge. I love using the challenge mechanic because the challenge mechanic creates this sense of competition and healthy competition. You don't have to be competing against each other in order to use challenge. Many times we think that it has to be a competitive game for there to be challenge, but there can also be a collaborative challenge that you can use. And there are very interesting ways of using challenge to create engagement in learning and in games.
Mm-hmm. Help me understand. So, what is the trend in the industry or the request that you're getting from clients? Is it rather based games on individual challenges, like so really to see how one person is managing sort of a difficult situation or scenario, or is it rather based on a collaborative environment where groups of people work together and try to solve something?
Both, both. I think there is a need for both, and I'm hearing a lot of my clients, a lot of people talking about both of these approaches. Of course, one is easier than the other. The individual gameplay is much easier because it's a single linear gameplay experience, which can be created and can be deployed quite fast and can be very controlled as well. So you know if the person does this, something else is going to happen. But when you create a multiplayer environment, then there are so many moving parts because everybody's operating using Nash's equilibrium. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but game theory, which doesn't necessarily have to do with game design, but game theory talks about something called Nash's equilibrium, which is every person is going to do whatever it is that they possibly can in order to maximize their payoff. It sounds like life. And that's why John Nash, yeah, right. That's why John Nash wrote the Nash's equilibrium, and behavioral economists and behavioral scientists use Nash's equilibrium as a medium to understand how behavioral dynamics will play out. So what I mean to say is that when you create a multiplayer gaming environment, Nash's equilibrium plays a significant role because every single person in that room is going to do whatever it is that they can in order to maximize their payoff. And from a outcome standpoint, it can be incredibly rewarding because it actually indicates what and how people deal with different situations in real life, which can be very quickly and effectively simulated in a short, bite-sized, 2-hour compressed experience.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree with that. It sounds really interesting, and it's well, I totally agree. I totally understand what you explained because I wasn't familiar with the term at all. Um, when we talk about game theory, and when we're putting it now into practice, so all that behavioral economics background information that you design games, and you have one very big game that is called Aviva. It's a leadership game designed by you. Would you like to talk a little bit about how is Aviva working, and what are like the elements there, the skills that you're looking at when you're playing it?
Sure, absolutely. So interestingly, the name is commonly pronounced as, well, it sounds like Evive, but the name is actually a culmination of two different words. So one is a word evolve, and the other one is thrive. And so when we put these two words together, we've got evive.
And
So
vibe.
that's yeah, that's the pronunciation. So I guess to answer your question, how did I come about this game, and what are some of the maybe outcomes that can emerge as a function of playing this game? The original intent of building this game was to help teams identify their misalignments, their dysfunctions, and to surface the opportunities for collaboration and align one another by removing silos within teams. And as teams get bigger as organizations get bigger, this is a very common occurrence that happens in nearly all organizations where teams tend to work in silos and tend to operate out of their own accord and out of their own key objectives. And many a times we lose sight of the really big picture. What is the organization's purpose, and what are we really here for? What are we here to do? And so Evive really beautifully brings that out, and it allows opportunities for sabotaging the entire group based on your action. Every decision that every single person makes in the game affects other people. And many a times, what surfaces, which is really intriguing, is that people take action without necessarily realizing that their actions are affecting someone else. And I think that's one of the really big lessons that people take away from having played the game. The game has a fairly decent shelf life. You can play the game multiple times and draw learning from each time that you play the game.
And if we look at that from an organizational perspective, so how do organizations use the game? Do they embed it in their leadership trainings? Do they send to you their managers or leaders?
Yeah, so they do a number of things. So some organizations prefer to build learning journeys using Evive. Some organizations prefer to use it as a diagnostic tool, where before they kick off a project or a program, they put the players into it, and when players come out of it, they realize that there's a need for development. I think one of the biggest gaps in the learning space is that often we've conducted our own learning needs analysis or the needs analysis on the whole to evaluate what's really wrong with, or not what's necessarily wrong, but what needs to be developed as a skill or a competency. And we build and craft these beautiful learning experiences or learning programs, but the participants themselves are not really seeing the need for something like that, and that becomes kind of a gap, isn't it? So one of the things that Evive is able to do is create the appetite for learning. uh, by playing the game and by failing in the game environment, people develop the understanding and the appreciation. Okay, I'm not very good at problem solving, or I need to learn how to make better decisions, or I need to just improve my communication, or I need to manage my emotions better. Especially when it gets charged, I get emotionally charged. I tend to take certain decisions which aren't necessarily productive. And so that really leads us into a space where we're saying, okay, now that we've realized this, what can we do about it? And that's where the learning actually really starts. And that's another example. And finally, there are examples like organizations who are training their facilitators, their internal learning professionals, to use the game and then facilitate it for a range of competencies like the ones you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah. And we already had a question if we can provide you the game, please. And here is one of the links that we have for the certification, for example. I would strongly recommend you to try out one of Mohsin's sessions. It's really engaging and interesting to see how the dynamics evolve over a session of 2 hours. And well, definitely me as a non-gamer, I can say I found my way around, and I'm definitely going to join another time just to experience it with a little bit more experience, to say so. It's just to play it with a little bit more experience. So when we think about managers or organizations that use Evive as a tool as a diagnostic tool, how would that work then? Do they hire you that you run the diagnostics for them? How is that working?
Yeah, one of the things that's been happening in the last 6 or 8 months, which is, in my opinion, so beautiful. For a long time, I come from an applied behavioral science background as well, and I have a background in behavioral analysis and all that. And one of the beautiful things that's happened in the last 8 months is that I have started to help other facilitators learn how to use Evive for their own learning experiences and for doing their own bit. And I'm so incredibly proud because there are so many incredible people out there who have far greater talent than me when it comes to understanding behavior and observing certain key instances of behavior and translating it into meaningful insight and information. So for a long time, what I would do is I would facilitate a game, observe the behavior, and we have a rubrics that kind of helps us evaluate this behavior in the game means this, and so on and so forth. But over the last 8 months, people have just gone crazy with this thing because people have been using it for coaching, people have been using it for facilitation, people have been using it for diagnostic. So, in a nutshell, one of two ways this can be used. Where one is either I can work with the person or the client directly, or I can connect you with somebody who is brilliant at doing this work because they're already certified to run the game.
Oh, but you know what, Mohsen? I just realized that even though, of course, I do know what Evive is about, maybe we forgot to tell that to everybody out there what Evive exactly, because we know it's a leadership game. It trains and fosters collaboration, leadership, communication, a book of world competencies. But would you maybe briefly explain how Evive works, but in simple terms?
Okay, in simple terms, if I were to put it in a nutshell, Evive is a collaborative multiplayer game which requires team members to really work with one another and see the big picture in order to achieve a common goal. And the way that we do this, it's kind of like end of worlds. I'm kind of a fan sci-fi guy, as you can imagine already. So I like these post-apocalyptic kind of themes. So this one is where Earth is becoming a methane planet, and you have to be able to breathe methane air. And to do that, there's a really important genome experiment that has to happen. But there's a key ingredient in this genome experiment, and that key ingredient is called a movilenium. Now, you need these movileniums. So players are working together in order to find these movileniums in order to evolve, because that's what they need to do in the game as well. And there's kind of a pun there, if you're catching the drift a little bit. And so they have to evolve. But mining movileniums is very expensive. So people have to work hard to build commerce, do commerce, and build their revenue streams so that they have enough money so they can ultimately get those movileniums. And what happens along the way is it's kind of like life, right? Because when you're living your life, you may start out with a long-term objective that, in 5 years, I'm going to do this. And then what happens? Maybe 6 months down the road, we get distracted, or we lose focus, or we lose motivation, or something else comes along the way, which kind of derails us. And that's exactly what happens in the game as well. when players are playing the game, they have this long-term vision that they start out with. In the strategy, it's brilliant, it's so beautiful. But by the time we're starting to execute it, they start to realize that there are missing parts. And one of the biggest missing parts is that team members who are expected to perform and achieve the goal aren't necessarily equipped. And the other team members who may have all the information or may be well equipped may not necessarily be providing that information to the ones who need it. So, so what surfaces as a result is collaboration, communication, dealing with VUCA, da 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 da. And so when you debrief it, that's where you can really draw these learning
Mm.
that's meaningful for your learning group.
And how long does such a game session take usually? If you think about on average, how long do teams play together? And is it maybe, for example, as well, and like every 2 days they meet again, or how do you design that?
Yeah, there are a number of really unique and beautiful ways in which you can design this. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But in terms of how long does each experience last, it can last from as little as 2 hours and as much as 4 hours for each instance. And I say this because imagine people are coming in, you teach them how to play the game, that's about 15 or 20 minutes, and then you then give them some time to come up with a strategy, they come up with a plan of action, and then they go into the real game. So one of the things you want to do in a game like this, or any game for that matter, is you want to equip people with the ability to take valuable and meaningful actions. When people are taking meaningful actions, that's when they gain the confidence that they need in order to live out those actions and see the consequences of those decisions that they're making along the way. So a typical game will last anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. And you could design learning journeys that can span from a couple of weeks. I recommend that you do once every 2 weeks because that's enough time for you to embed any kind of existing or ongoing learning so that
Hmm.
people can learn from that and then come back and apply that learning. And I recommend we do it up to 3 times so that there is a progression in that learning journey. So you start off with a single game with maybe no context of learning, and then you surface the learning challenges or the areas of development from that, and you use that to fuel your learning content. And over the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, you teach whatever communication, collaboration that you wanted to teach, and then you move into the second game where you hope to apply what you learned in from the previous and from the content, and then you move to the third one, where ultimately we hope that the participants will win and it'll end with a victory, which will make it far more meaningful for the learners as they play.
Mm-mm. And I remember that you mentioned because we're talking a lot about learning journeys here. And that's also, I remember one of the LinkedIn lives that I had with Melanie Martinelli from the Learning Gym. We were talking about both of us very, very enthusiastic about virtual learning, that the beauty of the virtual space is that we can sort of junk it to whatever size or length we want to junk it. And that's the beautiful thing because I assume, and I think that I remember you saying that you had the first gamification or game that you designed, you were going with the devices into the training room, correct, or something like that. So also
Oh, yeah.
here we see that how it is possible to design beautifully these virtual learning journeys that you have over 6 weeks, people collaborating, developing, reflecting. That is so important.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely important. I think we really need to move away from learning as an event and see it as a journey because that's really how we learn. We don't change, especially when it comes to behavioral shift. We are expecting people to develop new behaviors, draw insights through which they can change something about themselves, which has been a habit really for years. And they've been cultivating this habit and they live out this habit on a day-to-day basis. We're expecting them to change that. And that's going to require a journey. That's going to require a process.
Mhm.
So many times I've seen, learners being thrusted into a brilliant gaming experience or a brilliant learning experience, which was so amazing. And people just drew so much learning from that. Yet 3 months down the road, people just remember it as being fun. And what was the learning? Well, yeah, I learned this, but did I apply it? Not really. So So I think it's time we start asking ourselves, what can we do to provide support to people after they've gone through a learning experience to continue that learning and support for them to ultimately apply it and bring it into life.
Yeah, yeah, that is so important, and we talked about that also something in one of my past shows here. That it is also, it's not only, it's my, of course, responsibility myself as a learner to be self-directed, to have the motivation, the self-organization skills, to seek for the challenge and reflect upon the learnings. But it's also other people need to be involved, like whether it is HR, whether it is a learning coach facilitator later on, or even the own manager that provides you with questions, embeds your learnings into the context, into your environment, whether it is a team meeting or something where people report on their learnings, report on what they have learned. And
Yeah.
I think that is like something that we still see is, it's pretty missing, isn't it?
It is. I have to agree. And for this reason, I built another game a few years back, and this game was called Superhero Within. And the objective of this game, I come from a pure ILT sort of an ecosystem where I've done a lot of instructor-led training programs and facilitation. And one of the things that I realized along the way was that when people leave the classroom experience, they don't necessarily have the support that they need to apply what it is that, and sometimes it's also motivation, sometimes it's confidence. So one of the games that I created was Superhero Within, and the intent of this game was to get people to apply the learning outside of the classroom. And we did this in a really unique way. We basically had something called virtues in the game, and these virtues were behaviors. So they're kind of like virtues borrowed from the Gallup Strength Finder, if you will, like activator and achiever, and those kinds of virtues, which are really important for people to live out and behave. But the only way that you will actually get the virtue is if you display the behavior. And who has the control? Your manager could have the control, or the HR, the learning professional in the organization can have the control, or your peers can have the control. So they can actually rate you as somebody who has this virtue. And when you display this virtue is when you get that virtue. And with that virtue, you can progress in the game. So you bring that learning component back into the game so that they can progress in the game, and the game then enhances their capability to continue living and gaining confidence in that quote unquote virtue or skill, if you will.
Absolutely. And we just got another comment. Yeah, absolutely. We agree. Dr. Samin is also writing, learning is definitely a journey, a process, specifically if it's language learning. Yes, absolutely. And also the examples that we had here about leadership, collaboration, communication, and at the end, behavioral changes, they work the best when we look at it in a long-term perspective. We are coming already to an end, but I still have one super burning question for myself, and also something that was already asked in one of the posts that I had out there. So, what are the pitfalls to avoid that limit the effectiveness in virtual training? What are the most important pitfalls that you see are happening? Maybe not even in such a big, to say so, in such a big game as yours, but also in embedding small gamification elements. So what are the pitfalls here?
I think the biggest pitfall is to assume that just because it's a game, it's going to solve all our engagement problems, uh, and that is definitely a misconception when it comes to using games for learning. Yes, it will engage people, but it's not going to solve all our engagement and learning problems. The other thing is, just because people are engaged doesn't mean they're learning. That's the other thing. So when we're designing games, or when we're designing even game components inside your learning program, you've really got to be meticulous about your design and build it with intent and put the right mechanics at the right places. This is really an art, and it requires a little bit of skill. So you've got to spend some time learning about these mechanics and where to use them, how to influence behavior, anticipate the behavior of, and finally do enough and more play testing. Test it out, see what happens, and be okay to make the changes on the fly. I heard a great example from somebody not very long ago, that for a startup to be up and running, it's kind of like building a car while it's driving. And and don't be afraid to build your car while it's moving and while you're driving it. So let passengers on and let passengers off, but continue to iterate on the feedback that you get along the way and make it better every step of the way. Don't expect a final product. Get started. Just get started. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
And I think I really like that, because not only because it has a perfectly positive connotation for this conversation to come to an end, but also because that's what it is about when we talk about virtual learning journeys and virtual teaching. Many of us were facing struggles and were feeling exhausted, anxious about going virtual, but it is about testing it out and trying it out. And the same goes also for gamification. And that's why I really love these as sort of having the closing words. So let's all start. Build our cars on the fly. No, well, build the planes on the fly. No, the cars on the drive. Anyways, embed the feedback that you are getting, develop, design, co-create. Also get a lot of the feedback from your participants, because I assume when I'm thinking about my students or my learners in higher education and in the companies that I'm working with, I'm getting so much feedback that is so valuable throughout the whole training that I can embed. And of course, if I have like the agility to even embed it from the morning to the afternoon or 2 days later, it is absolutely fantastic. Mohsen, it is tremendous. Getting to know your tool better, getting to know what you developed better. So everybody out there, have a look in the App Store and also go to the webpage. Look at Evive, the leadership game at Gamitar. And also don't miss to connect with Mohsen, because you know that he is posting a lot of things on LinkedIn when it comes to gamification in virtual learning journeys. And I hope I wrote it correctly. #21
Yes, you
game
did.
mechanics. Absolutely fantastic. So that is the hashtag to follow, beyond, of course, mine. So virtual space here, you shouldn't be missing that either. Marcin, thank you so much for being with us. It was a super engaging conversation for me, very interesting. And as you know that I already signed up for one of your upcoming games again to play it with a bit more experience that I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for having me here. It's been a real joy.
Thank you very much. And you know, I told you that I prepared sort of a virtual cocktail backstage. So give me a second. I'm just closing the room and then I'm joining you for to cheers together. Okay.
Sounds good.
See you in a second. Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, and with that, another virtual space here, LinkedIn Live, came to an end. You know, it is 42 minutes of knowledge bites that we are providing you with every week. Next week, we are also going to have a LinkedIn Live on Friday. Slightly later, we are going to talk about collaboration superpowers. And I'm having with me on my LinkedIn Live show the one and only collaboration superpowers woman, Lisette Sutherland from Collaboration Superpowers, because that's how her company is called, the platform is called. We're going to talk about virtual collaboration. We're going to talk about tools, tricks, tips, and of course, as well, leadership. And with that, I'm really very happy that I got so many comments from you. Thank you very much for joining in. Thanks a lot to everybody out there. I see also Dr. Samen, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much also, Andreas Heindl. I know you joined from Austria. Thank you very much for that as well. And with that, I'm leaving you into the weekend. I hope you're going to have a beautiful Saturday, Sunday, and Friday afternoon, evening, or whatever your time zone is now. And I hope I'm going to see you next week to talk about collaboration superpowers. Have a beautiful weekend. Bye-bye.